Welcome to the debate. So, I want you to imagine for a second that you are at a high stakes diplomatic summit.
Okay.
You've hired a translator to convey your, precise, carefully measured words to a foreign dignitary. But every single time you speak, a simple factual sentence, your translator turns to the dignitary and just adds a dozen flattering adjectives, maybe upgrades your official title and, I don't know, invents a few extra treaties you supposedly signed.
Right. And when you pull that translator aside and confront them, they just smile and say, but doesn't it sound so much more impressive this way? Like, I'm just giving them what they want to hear. I'm giving you polish.
Exactly. It might sound beautiful to the dignitary, but it is fundamentally unusable because it has completely severed the tighter reality.
Yeah.
And today, we are exploring this massive friction between fluency and truth. We're grounding this entirely in the Living Professional Record, or LPR Academy Module 7. The curriculum is specifically titled AI as Translator, Not Authority.
And it attempts to thread a remarkably difficult needle, I think. The LPR standard acknowledges that generative AI is, well, incredibly powerful at generating professional surfaces. Resumes, LinkedIn profiles, interview narratives. But it establishes extremely rigid, almost draconian guardrails for how these large language models can actually be used in practice.
Which brings us to the core of our discussion today, which is the rejection mandate. The framework explicitly directs advisors that they must be willing to reject AI output. It highlights that even the most beautifully polished output might be completely unusable.
Unusable is the key word there.
Exactly. To frame our positions briefly, I will be arguing that the strict reject and log protocol is a triumph of governance. It perfectly neutralizes AI's risks while capturing its translation power.
And I'll be arguing that the heavy, constant reliance on human rejection actually exposes AI as a tool whose core predictive nature is just actively hostile to professional truth.
Well, I see this reject and log protocol as a massive win, because the system is incredibly clear-eyed about what AI is. By explicitly establishing that fluency is not evidence, the framework really empowers the advisor.
Empowering, really?
Yes, absolutely. The curriculum states you have to reject AI output when it invents facts, invents metrics, changes ownership, broadens scope, exposes private details, or, uses generic language. The willingness to look at a beautifully written sentence and actively reject it proves the human retains authority. The record governs the AI, right? The AI does not govern the record.
I come at it from a different way. I look at that exact same framework, and I see a system buckling under the weight of a fundamentally incompatible tool. Think about the sheer volume of complex safeguards Module 7 requires just to safely turn this thing on.
It is thorough.
It's exhausting. You have to build safe source packets, write source-bound prompts, perform rigorous claim checks, and maintain a formal rejected AI claims log. When a tool's default state is to turn emerging skills into mature claims or inflate verbs from coordinated to spearheaded, calling its constant rejection governance working is, well, it's putting a positive spin on a tool that is actively resisting the truth.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. We really need to dig into the shift happening here. For decades, polish and grammar were reliable proxies for professional competence, right? If a resume was perfectly formatted, you assumed the candidate was diligent. What Module 7 recognizes is that AI has driven the cost of sounding qualified to zero.
Right. Fluency is infinitely cheap now.
Exactly. But it hasn't changed the evidence required to support a claim. So mechanical rejection is how we separate machine-readable signal from human-believable trust. You're an advisor, right? You look at a client's raw notes. The evidence shows they created a shared checklist for one team. You feed that into the AI, and the AI spits back, spearheaded an enterprise-wide onboarding transformation.
Which happens constantly.
Yes. And as the advisor, you strike it down. The text explicitly tells you to say, this sounds polished, but the record does not support it. And they emphasize that is not failure. That is governance working. It's the professional immune system functioning exactly as designed.
Yeah, but an immune system fighting a constant aggressive infection is not a state of health, it's a state of war. You have to look at the mechanical reality of what you're asking that advisor to do. You are employing a translator, who, by its very statistical architecture, desperately wants to hallucinate outcomes.
It predicts them.
Right, because underneath the hood, they are probabilistic token predictors. They predict the next most likely word based on human writing. And historically, human resumes are wildly inflated.
They certainly are. The AI is just holding up a mirror to the market.
Yes, but it's a funhouse mirror. The AI's center of gravity for professional jargon naturally pulls toward hyperbole. It correlates managed with revolutionized. If the advisor is constantly fighting the tool's inherent mathematical urge to inject those words, it's a constant liability. It is aggressively attempting to rewrite history to fit a statistical norm.
But that predictive nature is exactly why formalizing the rejection process is so brilliant. It takes the subjective guesswork completely out of the advisor's hands. When the advisor logs that inflated output, they are teaching the client the difference between a mature, defensible claim and market fluff, which leads us to the rejected AI claims log.
Yes, the administrative nightmare.
I don't see it as a nightmare. The standard makes maintaining an AI translation log a mandatory capstone requirement for candidates. You can't just delete the AI's bad suggestion. You actually have to log what was rejected and why, like if it invented a metric or broadened the scope.
Right, and
then you log your revised human-approved replacement. This is vital. It prevents professional amnesia. It preserves provenance.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You're praising the provenance, but you are totally ignoring the cognitive load. It is exhausting. And it's not just about catching outright lies. It's the battle against, well, what the text calls generic language.
The blandness problem.
Yes. Even when the AI doesn't outright lie or invent a metric, it defaults to abstract nouns. It pumps out phrases like results-driven professional with a proven ability to leverage cross-functional collaboration.
Which sounds polished, but conveys absolutely zero operational texture.
Exactly. So the rejection process isn't just a simple fact check. The advisor has to systematically deconstruct the output to rescue the client's distinctive voice from this sea of generic garbage. If you are spending your entire afternoon untranslating the AI, the burden of that constant revision negates the speed benefits entirely.
Well, I think the mechanics of that revision process are actually the core professional exercise of modern record keeping. The act of documenting that today we rejected spearheaded onboarding transformation and accepted coordinated manager review proves the advisor isn't blinded by fluency. Because 3 weeks later, the client is going to come back and say, hey, I ran my profile through an AI and it sounds so much more dynamic. Why can't we use this version?
Because clients are desperate to sound senior.
Exactly. And without the log, you're just arguing aesthetics. With the log, you can say we tested that language. Here is exactly where the AI crossed the line and broadened your scope, which you cannot defend. It grounds the conversation in evidence.
But you are still introducing a tool that constantly tries to cross that line. The standard insists that the rendering must be human believable. If AI's architecture is actively working against that by inventing scope or exposing privacy boundaries, why are we using it?
I'm not convinced the architecture is inherently hostile. You're treating the AI like a hurricane that can't be controlled. Blaming AI for inflating claims is kind of like blaming a car for speeding when you didn't set the cruise control.
Okay.
This is where source-bound prompting and safe source packets come in. If you just tell an AI, make this operations manager sound impressive, it's going to riff. Of course it hallucinates.
So how do you stop the riffing? You use a safe source packet. You extract the metadata, the timeline, the specific approved verbs. You create a sanitized summary that protects privacy boundaries. Then you wrap that in a source-bound prompt. The instruction is, using only the evidence provided below, create 3 structural options. Do not invent metrics or titles. Preserve all privacy boundaries. When you explicitly limit the AI to governed source material, the rejection rate plummets. AI only goes rogue when prompted from desire rather than source.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how this falls apart with emerging skills?
What do you mean? Even with the most ironclad, safe, source-bound prompt, the mathematical architecture will fight you when the evidence isn't fully matured. Let's look at the texts section on AI use with emerging claims. Say your client's safely extracted evidence is simply that they completed a data analytics course. There's no workplace application yet.
Right, it's just an emerging claim, building a capability.
Yes. But look at what happens when you feed that into the AI. Even with strict constraints, the AI naturally tries to render it as a mature competency. It will spit out data analytics professional with proven reporting expertise.
Because the statistical center of gravity pulls the words data and analytics toward proven.
Precisely. The AI's predictive nature is algorithmic polish. It will always try to make the client sound more senior than the evidence supports. So the advisor reads proven reporting expertise, manually strikes it down, and replaces it with building data analytics capability. Calling that governance working is just a polite way of describing an endless battle against the machine's programming.
It is a battle, but a winnable one. The AI literally cannot comprehend the difference between a practice dashboard and an enterprise rollout, but the human does. The AI provides the grammar and structural rendering, and the human applies the maturity filter. This is exactly why the text insists that human review is mandatory. The human must always sit between the AI and the final record.
Which I completely agree with. But if the human has to do all the heavy lifting regarding context, maturity, and specific operational texture, why are we mandating the tool's use at all?
Because we have to live in reality. Clients are swimming in AI tools. They will paste unsafe, confidential materials directly into public prompts. The advisor has to know how to intervene. It ensures they've built the muscle memory to keep the tool accountable.
Well, I won't argue the rigor of the standard, but the sheer density of that rigor proves my ultimate point. If you need safe source packets, strict claim checks, translation logs, and a constant mandate to reject output just to safely use a text generator, we have to deeply question the tool. The privacy risks alone are staggering. The tool desperately wants to tell a good story. The record absolutely demands the true story.
And I think that tension is exactly where we find our convergence today. Because we both agree on the standard's most central tenet, right? Human review is completely mandatory. The client, governed by the advisor, owns the final representation.
Absolutely. The standard correctly insists that AI output is never the source of truth. It's just a rendering that must heavily scrutinized. AI might help the record speak more clearly, but it cannot decide what the record is allowed to say.
Exactly. So to summarize my perspective, I firmly believe Module 7 provides the exact necessary mechanisms to make AI a safe, powerful translator. The rejection mandate isn't a sign that the system is broken. It's proof that we can harness machine fluency while preserving human believable trust.
And to summarize my view, while I agree the governance tools are necessary, the sheer volume of rejection and revision required proves that AI and professional truth are fundamentally uneasy bedfellows. The constant battle against its drive to inflate and genericize shows that managing this technology is an enormous operational burden.
Well, there is clearly so much more to explore in the LPR material, especially regarding privacy boundaries and market translation. Governing the tools that govern our language is going to be a huge challenge.
It certainly is, because if we allow the tools to define the language we use, we eventually allow them to define the truth of what we actually accomplished.
Which brings us right back to our overly enthusiastic translator at the summit. Do you fire them entirely, or do you hand them a strictly governed dictionary and double-check every word? The LPR model has made its choice. We leave it to you, the listener, to decide if that level of rigorous governance is sustainable in your own work. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.